She leaned closer, her small hands gripping my sleeve. Her eyes. Too old for 8 years. Grandpa, after the party, they're going to steal your fortune. The words didn't just cut through the music and laughter. They cut through me. I froze. Right there, between the smell of birthday cake and the sound of clinking glasses, the truth hit harder than any blow. I'd walked into this house thinking I was here to celebrate my granddaughter. But now, I knew I'd walked straight into an ambush. For 72 years, I've seen my share of betrayal. Old business rivals. Shady deals. But never from my own blood. I looked down at Sophie. Her lip trembled, but her voice stayed steady. They said they'll do it tonight, Grandpa. After everyone leaves. They have papers from the bank. The room suddenly felt smaller, hotter, and every smile from my son and daughter-in-law now looked rehearsed. I forced myself to smile back. Because in that moment I made a promise not just to Sophie but to myself. They thought they knew the man I'd become. An old widower, soft, easy to manipulate. They forgot who I was before the wrinkles. Before the gray hair. I built an empire from nothing, and I know how to protect what's mine. What happened after that shocked everyone in this room. So listen closely, because this isn't just a story about betrayal, it's about justice, the kind of justice you never see coming. If you love stories where the guilty get what they deserve, stay with me, and maybe hit that subscribe button. Richard Hale had spent 72 years building a life he thought was unshakable. From the dust of Portland construction sites to the polished boardrooms where million-dollar deals were signed, he'd carved his name into the city. He was a man who knew the weight of steel beams and the weight of a handshake. 5 years ago, his wife Ellen passed away. Her absence left the house quieter, colder. Some days, the silence felt heavier than the tools he once carried on his back. But then came Sophie, 8 years old. Bright eyes louder than the quiet, warmer than the empty rooms. She wasn't just his granddaughter. She was his tether to something pure. Every Saturday, she'd run up the walkway backpack bouncing ready for their fishing trips or kitchen pancake battles. And every time Richard felt that ache in his chest ease just a little. Sophie listened when he spoke about the world, about hard work, about keeping your word. She'd ask questions most adults wouldn't. She'd draw pictures, stick figures of Grandpa and me, and tape them to his fridge like priceless art. Richard had raised a son, Michael, but Sophie, she was different. She didn't just take from him. She gave something back: hope, laughter, reason. When Ellen was alive, she'd often say, "Promise me, Richard, you'll always take care of her." He promised, and he kept that promise close like the keys to his house, like the keys to his life. Because, to Richard, Sophie wasn't just family. She was the one thing worth protecting at all costs. Michael Hale was Richard's only son. Once, he'd been the boy who saved lunch money to buy his father a pen for signing big contracts one day. Dad. But that boy was gone. Somewhere along the years, replaced by a man always one step away from the next emergency. At 40, Michael hadn't held a steady job in years. Construction work was too hard on his back. Office jobs were too boring. Yet somehow he always had time for poker nights and weekend trips. And then there was Laura, 38, sharp, smile, sharper mind. The kind of woman who could make a compliment sound like a command. To neighbors, she was gracious. To Richard, she was polite on the surface. But he'd seen the flicker in her eyes at Ellen's funeral, when she'd commented on how big the house was for one man. Laura controlled the rhythm of their marriage like a conductor. Michael followed her lead, whether it was a vacation they couldn't afford, or a short-term loan from Richard that never got paid back. They were a team, not in building a family, in building excuses. Over the years, Richard's support had kept them afloat. Mortgage payments, car repairs, private school tuition for Sophie. $80,000 in 3 years. Every request wrapped in guilt tied with Laura's perfect timing. Richard wanted to believe it was just bad luck, that his son would find his footing again. But deep down he knew. Some debts aren't about money. They're about character. And Michael was running out of both. Portland, Oregon. A city of rain-washed streets, old brick buildings, and the scent of coffee drifting from corner cafes. Richard's home sat just beyond the city center, a wide cedar-framed house he'd built with his own hands. Every beam, every nail carried a memory. The porch creaked in a familiar way when Sophie ran up its steps. The backyard held Ellen's rose garden, still blooming every spring. Inside, sunlight spilled through tall windows onto polished wood floors. Floors Richard had sanded himself 30 years ago. It wasn't just a house. It was a fortress of memories. The place where Ellen's laughter still seemed to linger in the halls. Michael and Laura lived 15 minutes away in a newer subdivision. Their 2-story home looked perfect from the outside, fresh paint-trimmed hedges. But behind closed door, bills stacked on the counter and arguments whispered in low voices. Family gatherings were rare now. Birthdays for Sophie were the exception. Richard never missed one. No matter the weather, no matter the mood. This year's party was set at Michael and Laura's place. Bright balloons tied to the mailbox. A rented, bouncy castle swaying in the drizzle. Neighbors waved. Friends arrived with wrapped presents. From the outside, it was picture-perfect suburban life. But Richard knew. Some houses hide their cracks, and some smiles are rehearsed. He just didn't know, not yet, that today's celebration would become the stage for betrayal. It started with a phone call. Saturday morning. Rain tapping the kitchen window, steam curling up from Richard's coffee. The screen lit up Michael. Richard frowned. His son wasn't an early caller. Not unless something was wrong. "Dad," Michael began, voice tight. "I know it's short notice, but Laura and I were thinking maybe you could come to Sophie's party a little early today." Richard set down his mug. "Early? Since when do I need an invitation to see my granddaughter?" Michael chuckled, but it sounded rehearsed. No, it's not like that. We wanted to talk about some family things. Family things. In 3 years of widowhood, family things had never required a special meeting. What kind of things, Richard asked? A pause. Muffled voices in the background, Laura's tone sharp, insistent. Michael cleared his throat. "Oh, just plans. Ways we can all be more involved with each other." Richard stared out the window. Mrs. Kendall across the street was watering her flowers in the drizzle. "Laura wants me there early," he said slowly. "Yes, she's been planning this for weeks. Really wants to see you." That was odd. Laura had never really wanted to see him. Not unless money was on the table. Richard forced a light laugh. "All right, son, I'll be there early." As he hung up, the coffee had gone cold. And in his chest, something colder had just settled in. Richard decided to pick up Sophie's gift early. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle, the kind that made Portland streets shine like glass. At the mall, he found the perfect present, a detailed Lego set of the Space Needle. Sophie loved buildings just like her grandfather. Outside, as he loaded the box into his SUV, a familiar voice called out, "Richard." What a surprise. It was Mrs. Kendall, his neighbor of 15 years. Silver hair tucked neatly under a scarf, bookstore bag in her hand. "Morning." Richard smiled. "Out shopping?" "Oh, you know me. Always early." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. I saw Michael and Laura downtown earlier this week. Tuesday morning, I think. They were coming out of First Pacific Bank. Looked serious, big stack of papers in Michael's hands. Richard's fingers tightened on the shopping bag. The bank. Did they say what for? Mrs. Kendall shrugged. No, but they looked very official. Maybe refinancing young folks do that all the time. Richard forced a nod. Probably nothing. But inside, his instincts stirred. 30 years of running a construction business had taught him people carry a certain look when they're closing a deal. And Michael had never been one for paperwork, unless someone else was paying. They said goodbye, but the image stuck in Richard's mind Michael Laura, and a stack of bank documents. By the time he slid into the driver's seat, his coffee from that morning felt even colder. The front door swung open before Richard could knock. "Richard, you look wonderful today." Laura beamed, stepping forward with open arms. Her voice was sweet. Too sweet. Like syrup poured over something rotten. Inside, streamers hung from every doorway. Clusters of balloons filled the corners. It was more elaborate than any party they'd thrown before. Michael appeared from the living room, his grin-wide voice loud. "Dad, come meet Mike from work. This is my amazing father I've told you so much about." Amazing father. Richard almost laughed. Usually, Michael introduced him with jokes about being old school or too stubborn to retire. Today, every word felt rehearsed. Laura hovered close, touching Richard's arm twice in less than a minute, asking if he was comfortable refilling his glass before it was empty. Across the room, Sophie opened presents from friends. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. When she unwrapped the Lego set, her excitement flickered just for a moment before a shadow crossed her face. Laura swooped in. "Isn't Grandpa generous, honey? Say thank you properly." "Thank you, Grandpa. It's really cool," Sophie said softly, glancing away. Richard watched the noise of the party fading into the background. Every laugh from Michael felt too loud. Every glance between him and Laura lasted just a fraction too long. They weren't hosting a birthday party. They were performing, and he was their audience. For a brief moment, Richard wondered if he'd been too harsh in his thoughts. Maybe this sudden warmth from Michael and Laura was genuine. Maybe the bank visit was just coincidence. He sat at the edge of the couch watching Sophie laugh with a friend. The sound eased something in his chest. Perhaps he thought he was letting old grudges cloud his judgment. Then Sophie glanced toward him, quick, deliberate. Her smile faded. She excused herself from her friend, slipped out of the living room, and disappeared down the hallway. Curious, Richard followed, weaving through clusters of guests. He found her near the coat closet, small hands gripping a folded piece of paper. She looked up at him, eyes wide. "I think this fell out of Mom's purse," she whispered. Richard took it, unfolded the crisp document. His stomach tightened. At the top, in bold letters, "Power of Attorney Draft." Highlighted sections marked for signature. Blank lines waiting for witnesses. He looked back toward the living room. Laura was laughing at something Michael had said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. From here, the gesture seemed casual. But now, Richard could see it for what it was. Coordination. The warmth he'd tried to believe in evaporated. The room felt smaller, hotter. He slipped the paper into his jacket pocket, smiled at Sophie. "Good work, sweetheart. Now, let's get you back to your party." Inside, his mind was already moving. The doubt was gone, and the game had changed. The party noise faded as Richard and Sophie walked side by side down the hallway. When they reached the corner, Sophie stopped. She looked back toward the living room, making sure no one followed. Then she leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Grandpa, I have to tell you something about Mom and Dad." Richard knelt so their eyes were level. "What is it, sweetheart?" She bit her lower lip, Ellen's old habit whenever she was nervous. "I heard them talking last night, when I was supposed to be asleep. Mom said you have too much money for an old man living alone. She told Dad they were going to fix that problem tonight, after everyone leaves." Richard's chest tightened, and the papers from the bank he asked softly. Sophie nodded, her eyes glassy. Dad said, "What if he finds out?" And Mom told him it would be too late by then. A wave of cold anger spread through him, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that plans. Sophie's small hands twisted in her dress. "I don't want them to take your money. You're the only one who really listens to me." Richard pulled her into a hug, feeling the tremor in her shoulders. "You did the right thing telling me. But for now, we keep this between us. Can you do that?" She nodded. "Are you going to stop them?" "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "I'm going to handle everything." And in that moment, he wasn't just a grandfather. He was a man preparing for war. Richard returned to the living room with Sophie wearing the same polite smile he'd worn all afternoon. But inside, the clock had started ticking. Every laugh from Michael felt hollow now. Every glance from Laura carried the weight of the paper folded in his jacket. He stayed until the cake was cut, the candles blown out. Then he sighed, pressing a hand to his temple. "Think I'll head home early," he said. "This headache isn't letting up." Michael's brow furrowed. "You sure? We were hoping to talk after the guests leave." Another time, son Richard replied gently. He stepped into the cold drizzle outside, but his mind burned hot with focus. In the driver's seat, he took out his phone. First call, David Ross, vice president at First Pacific Bank, and an old friend from the construction days. "David, I need you at my house tomorrow morning, 10 sharp. Bring your portfolio binder." Second call. Karen Lewis, a notary he trusted for 20 years. "Karen, I've got some sensitive family paperwork to review tomorrow. Can you come by at 10? Both agreed without hesitation. Richard sat in the quiet car for a long moment. He could almost hear Ellen's voice, steady, certain to watch Michael carefully. Tomorrow, Michael and Laura would walk into his home thinking they'd won. They'd find 2 professionals waiting, and they'd learn Richard Hale was not a man you corner. That night, Richard didn't sleep much. He sat in his home office, the rain tapping a steady rhythm on the window. The power of attorney draft lay open on his desk, its highlighted signature lines glowing under the lamp. He pictured Michael and Laura sitting across from him tomorrow, all smiles, pretending this was for his own good. But they'd see something else instead. He spent the next hour setting the stage. 2 chairs directly in front of his desk for them. 1 seat to his left for David Ross, banker and witness. 1 seat to his right for Karen Lewis, notary and guardian of the law. Every document he needed was stacked neatly, bank statements showing years of emergency loans. A written list of every payment, mortgage, car tuition totaling over $80,000. Copies of his will ready to be rewritten. By 1 a.m., the plan was airtight. Michael and Laura would think they were gaining control over his life. Instead, they'd be walking straight into a legal crossfire. At 9:45 the next morning, Karen would arrive with her notary seal. At 10:00 sharp, David would knock on the door, portfolio in hand. And at 10:05, Michael and Laura would step inside. Right into the trap. Richard leaned back in his chair, a slow cold smile spreading across his face. They had underestimated him for the last time. Sunday morning. Gray skies hung low over Portland, the kind of weather that made the air feel heavy. At 9:45 sharp, Karen Lewis arrived. Professional suit, notary seal in one hand, leather journal in the other. Richard greeted her at the door, leading her into the office. "This should be straightforward. she said, arranging her tools on the side table. 5 minutes later, a knock sounded. David Ross stood there, tall and composed, portfolio binder under his arm. "Morning, Richard. Ready for that review?" "More ready than they are," Richard replied. He positioned David to his left, Karen to his right. The desk between them was set like a battlefield, documents-ready evidence in plain view. At 10:05, the front door opened. Michael and Laura stepped in, smiles wide. Laura carried the same leather folder from the party. Michael's eyes scanned the room and caught on the 2 extra faces. The smile wavered. "Dad, what's all this?" Richard's tone was warm, almost casual, just making sure everything is proper and legal. "You know, witnesses' official review." Laura recovered first, her voice smooth. "How thoughtful. This will make things so much easier." Richard gestured to the chairs. "Sit. Let's begin." As they settled, he could feel the shift in the air, a current of unease creeping under their practiced calm. The trap had closed. Richard leaned forward, elbows on the desk. His eyes locked on Michael first, then Laura. "Before we sign anything, there's something you should know." Laura's pen stopped mid-click. Michael frowned. "Dad, what's wrong?" Richard's voice was steady. "I know about your visit to First Pacific Bank last Tuesday. I know about the conservatorship procedures you asked about. And I know about the power of attorney draft Laura's been carrying." Michael's face drained of color. Laura's smile stiffened, but her tone stayed smooth. "You're mistaken. That was for our own financial planning." Richard didn't blink. David Ross opened his portfolio, flipping to a page. "They asked about declaring a family member mentally incompetent. They wanted to know the fastest court process. They knew the terminology better than most attorneys." Karen looked up from her journal, eyebrows raised. "Mr. Hale, are you saying these documents were prepared under false pretenses?" "I'm saying," Richard replied, voice cold, "that my son and daughter-in-law plan to steal everything I've built over the last 40 years. Michael started to speak, but Richard cut him off. "Save it. You've been conditioning me for years. Loans, bills, tuition. 210 payments totaling over $80,000. He slid a thick folder across the desk. Every cent documented. Laura's hands tightened around her folder. The performance was over. Richard tapped the thick folder with one finger. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. Inside, he said, are 3 years' worth of transactions. Mortgage payments on your house, repairs on your car, private school tuition for Sophie. 210 payments, $80,000. He opened the folder, spreading the pages across the desk like a dealer laying down a winning hand. Neat columns, dates, amounts. Every entry backed by receipts, bank slips, and notes in his own handwriting. This, Richard continued, wasn't generosity. It was training. Training me to sign without asking questions. To agree before reading the fine print. Michael swallowed hard. "Dad, that's not—" "Don't lie," Richard cut in, his voice ice. "You left the evidence in your own pockets. Sophie found the draft you planned to have me sign tonight." Laura's jaw tightened. Her polished calm was slipping. "You're twisting this. We were trying to help." "Help," Richard leaned back, studying her. "Help doesn't involve researching how to have someone declared incompetent." David cleared his throat. "In my professional opinion, their questions at the bank were consistent with a planned guardianship takeover." Karen's pen paused over her journal. "I'd call this coercion at best." Richard gathered the papers into a single deliberate stack. "This ends today." The weight of his words filled the room, and for the first time Michael didn't look at his father. He looked at the floor. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Then soft footsteps in the hallway. Sophie appeared in the doorway, clutching a small stuffed rabbit to her chest. Her eyes darted from Richard to Michael to Laura. "What's going on?" she asked quietly. Laura's smile snapped back into place. "Sweetheart, we're just talking to Grandpa about some important papers." Richard turned in his chair, meeting Sophie's gaze. Her brow furrowed just slightly, the same look Ellen used to give him when she sensed something was wrong. Michael shifted uncomfortably under his daughter's stare. For the first time all morning, his bravado cracked. Sophie took a small step forward. Her voice trembled, but the words were steady. "Is this about the thing you told Dad to do tonight, Mom?" The air seemed to freeze. Laura's hand tightened around her folder. "That's enough, Sophie. Go back to your room." Richard's voice cut in low but firm. "No, she stays." Michael's shoulders sagged. He couldn't look at his daughter. And in that moment, Richard saw it. The shame. The recognition of what this would cost him, not just in money, but in her trust. Sophie's eyes never left his, and Michael looked away first. Richard straightened in his chair, the weight of the moment settling over the room. He gathered the papers into one sharp stack, the sound crisp as a verdict. "This conversation," he said slowly, "isn't about helping me. It's about controlling me. And it ends now." Michael opened his mouth, but Richard's hand went up. No more lies, no more performances. He reached for a new folder on the desk and slid it forward. "My will. Effective immediately, it changes. Everything I own, my home, my accounts, my investments, will go into an educational trust for Sophie." Laura's eyes narrowed. "You can't just—" "I can," Richard cut in, his voice hard as steel. "And I have a notary right here to make it official." Karen uncapped her pen, the faint click echoing in the silence. Michael leaned forward, desperation in his voice. "Dad, please, we made mistakes, but we can fix this." "You've had years to fix it," Richard replied. "Instead, you chose greed. You tried to turn my love for Sophie into a weapon against me." His gaze shifted to Laura. "You underestimated me. You thought age made me weak. It only made me patient." For a moment, no one spoke, only the faint scratching of Karen's pen as she prepared the paperwork. "This," Richard said, tapping the trust document, "is the only legacy I'll leave. And it's for her, no one else." The finality in his tone was unmistakable. The verdict had been delivered. Richard let the weight of his words hang in the air before continuing. "There is one way," he said, voice calm but unyielding, "for you to have a place in this family again." Michael's head lifted, hope flickering in his eyes. Laura leaned in wary. "You will both sign a formal renunciation of any claim to my estate," Richard said. "From this day forward, you earn your living without a single dollar from me." Laura's lips parted in protest, but Richard didn't stop. "You will get jobs, real ones. You will prove over the next 12 months that Sophie comes before your own comfort." He glanced at his granddaughter standing quietly by the door with her stuffed rabbit. "And you will never again use her as leverage against me." Michael swallowed. "That's a lot to ask." Richard's tone hardened. "It's the bare minimum. Millions of families do it every day without betraying the people who raised them." Karen slid a fresh page across the desk. "I can notarize their agreement right now if they choose." David folded his hands. "It's a fair offer, considering the alternative." Laura's eyes darted between the paper and Richard's face. "What if we refuse?" "Then you're out," Richard said simply. "No money, no second chances, and Sophie's future will be secured without you." Silence settled over the room. The choice was theirs. But Richard knew the real power was already back in his hands. The office was quiet now. The papers were signed. The storm, at least for today, was over. Richard stepped out into the hallway where Sophie waited, still clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her eyes searched his face. "Well?" she asked softly. He crouched down to meet her gaze. "It's done," he said. "Your future is safe no matter what happens with your mom and dad." Her shoulders relaxed, a weight lifting off a child who should never have carried it. "Safe? How?" "I've made sure there's money for you to go to any school you want, to study anything, even veterinary school, if that's what you choose." Her eyes widened. "Really? Even if it's expensive?" Richard smiled. "Especially if it's expensive, you deserve every chance." She hugged him hard, small arms tightening around his neck. "I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, more than anything." When she pulled back, there was a spark in her eyes. "Can we look at pictures of the schools? Maybe tonight." Richard chuckled. "Tonight, tomorrow, and as many nights as you want. We have time, Sophie. We have all the time in the world." For the first time all day, he felt the tension ease. In her smile, he saw the promise he'd made to Ellen alive, unbroken. That evening, the house was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. Not the hollow stillness of loss. The steady calm of a battle won. Richard stood at the back window looking out at Ellen's rose garden. The blooms were just starting to open pale pink against the dark green leaves. She'd loved those roses. And in moments like this, he could almost hear her voice. "Promise me you'll always take care of her." He had, and he would. The documents were locked safely in his desk. Sophie's future was written in ink untouchable. Michael and Laura's choices would be theirs to live with. Justice, Richard thought, didn't always come with a gavel or a courtroom. Sometimes it came from simply closing the door on the wrong people. He stepped outside the cool air, carrying the scent of rain and roses. Tomorrow would be another day. There would be work to do, schools, to research, trips to plan, a little girl's dreams to help shape. But tonight he let himself breathe. This wasn't just a story about betrayal. It was about knowing when to fight and when to let go. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there needed to hear it. So, if you've ever had to protect someone you love, even from your own family, tell me your story in the comments. And if you want to hear more tales where justice finds its way, subscribe, because the next one might be the story you've been waiting for.